What playwriting really taught me was structure. And how do you structure a story? There's a great quote, you may have heard this, which is, a story is the way to tell it, right? A story is the way to tell it. There's no such thing as the story. There's the telling of the story. You can tell the story a million different ways. And how you tell the story, that's the story.
Welcome to No More Bad Events, a fun and insightful podcast for professional event organizers and for anyone at any level interested in producing nothing but the best events. Each week, we'll talk with legendary event professionals to get an inside look into what they think makes a great event. And in the process, we'll draw out insider secrets, non-traditional approaches, and compelling stories from the most captivating personalities in the business. We'll definitely get the skinny on reaching that one big goal: no more bad events. I'm your host, Scott Bloom, comedian, event MC, and now your podcast host. Let's get started. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers, the most trusted, easy-to-use, full-service online platform for finding, connecting with, and hiring the best keynote speakers, hosts, and presenters in the world. With the deepest catalog of professionals available through the eSpeakers marketplace, you can be assured that the speaker you book will be the absolute best speaker based on your goals, bar none. eSpeakers, the #1 way to find your next perfect speaker. For more information, go to espeakers.com. Hey there, folks. Welcome back to another fun-filled episode of No More Bad Events. I am so thrilled to have you join us today because we have a guest who is as fascinating as they come, and I really can't wait for you to meet him. Who might that be? Well, I'll tell you. Though, I gotta be honest with you, at this point, you probably already know because you clicked on the episode, and I think his name is right there in the title, but let me build up a little suspense, add a little drama to this intro. On the podcast today, we've got the amazing Jeremy Dobrish. Jeremy is a 7-time published playwright, award-winning theater director, podcaster, and currently senior creative director at Proscenium, a New York event production agency. I really enjoy meeting and working with people who come from the theater. It's my background as well. Well, more stand-up than actual theater, but I was in a few plays when I lived in New York. Trust me, I wasn't that good. That's why I chose stand-up and hosting. It's more my wheelhouse, but I'm very familiar with theater people because I know a lot of them come into this industry. Anyway, we had a lot to talk about, especially how to bring the world of theater into the realm of corporate events. In this episode, Jeremy takes us on a journey to discover how storytelling can transform the way we connect, engage, and communicate. So here's my conversation with my newest theater friend, fellow podcaster and master storyteller, Jeremy Dobrish. Like a lot of corporate production folks, they start, have a theater background. And I was just asking you how you got to Proscenium. So why don't we take it from there? Because I got to tell you, you're the most celebrated director and playwright we've had on the show. So thank you for being here. You upped our stock tremendously.
Oh gosh, well, I'm honored, and I could just return the compliment and say, as I was logging on, I was like, this is like, live event royalty. I mean, I'm in the presence of greatness here. So I'm flattered that you asked and very happy to be here. So I was always looking for ways that I could use my skills to do something other than theater. And so basically that was film, television, teaching, or corporate events. And I would try to make inroads into any of those. I had limited success, let's say. And I knew a few people who were doing corporate events. And whenever I ran into them, I would ask them, hey, if you ever need a director, I'd love to direct a show for you guys. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know that, that's not really how it works.
What you did know is that we're all making a lot of money doing this. Right? It was a different pay scale than in theater.
Yeah, for sure. And so I never had any success in the corporate world. And then one day, one of my friends who you might know, Jeff Klinkenbeard, do you know him?
Yeah, I do know Jeff. Yes.
Yeah, he's fantastic. So funny, so smart. He called me up and said, "Hey, are you still interested in doing something like that? I know these guys, they're putting together a proposal. They need some help." So I came in to work on an RFP. I had no idea what an RFP was for Proscenium. And Chuck Santoro, who was the chief creative over there, said, "Look, if we win this account, we're going to have a lot of work next year. And would you be interested in coming on full time?" And I had never had a full-time job. I'd never gotten a paycheck. I never had reliable health insurance. I never had a desk or an office, any of that. And so it was a big, big decision. And I talked to my wife about it. And I said, I really like these guys. I really like the work. The people seem great. I had a lot of fun. It's a new challenge. So they got the account and they hired me. And that was 10 years ago. And I've been doing it ever since. But it has been a silo. I stay in the proscenium lane. I don't know, honestly, that much about the business outside of proscenium. We do our work and we work for our clients, and I do my job and I love it. And that's kind of what I'm interested in.
And what was that transition like? Not just hey, I work on my own schedule. What was the biggest difference between putting your creative energy towards creating a play or directing a play, and now you're creating basically business theater sometimes, and sometimes not even theater, it's just business, engagement, business meetings, business conferences?
Yeah. Well, I would say I think it is always business theater. If you have an audience, you're doing theater, even if it's an audience of one. That's how I look at it. I'll tell you what I thought the biggest difference was going to be. My fear was that the emotions that you can create in theater, when you go to a Broadway show, just that experience, are you really going to be able to create something like that in a business meeting? And I found that, yeah, you can. It's different, but it isn't better or worse. It's just different. Theater works because it's a metaphor. And corporate events work because they're not a metaphor. They're real. And so when you are doing a corporate event and, let's say it's an award show and everybody's celebrating the work of someone who did an incredible job and we all know it and we're happy for them and people are crying and they're so happy, or the CEO gets up and tells you, "Our success is because of you. I'm sitting back in an office, I get the credit, but you're the one on the front lines making this happen." And you see people crying, for the recognition they get. Or when everybody laughs, when 5,000 people, when you've engineered a joke, this, and 5,000 people laugh. That's just an incredible feeling. So I have found the emotion to be just as strong. I think, to answer your question, what I think the biggest difference is that in theater, you're kind of the bottom line. You're going to make the decision as to what we do. Whereas in corporate, the brand, the executives are the bottom line, and that's as it should be. And so what I have found is what I loved about directing theater is I got to manage all of these incredibly smart, talented, creative people who were so good at whatever they were good at. He's amazing at lighting. That's what he does, lighting. That's it. She makes incredible props. That's what she does. She's brilliant at it. And I got to oversee it all. And they would be fighting for their departments. From a lighting perspective, here's what we should do. From a props perspective, here's what we should do. And I would make the decision. Now, I feel like I'm the one fighting for something. I'm the one fighting for the most creative option we have. This is a way to make that moment, whatever it should be, more funny, more exciting, more emotional, whatever it is. That doesn't mean that's what we should do. That just means that's a very creative answer. And then I leave it to, whoever's making that decision on the brand side to say, okay, I want to go that way or I don't, or to collaborate and say, I don't want to do it that way, but what if we do it this way? And I say, well, what if we don't do it that way, but we do it the other way? And then we find an answer. And I love that. I think it's very, very analogous.
As a playwright and director, you're the captain of the ship. You're collaborating with the actors, but you have the vision. This is a little different because now you have to take in the input of your clients. Let's talk a little bit about your playwriting background. How does your background in playwriting influence your approach to creating these events?
I used to think the answer had to do with dialogue, right? If I can write for a character who's very different from me. I used to write plays about talking animals and mythological creatures and, all kinds of crazy stuff. If you can do that, then you should be able to write in someone else's voice, who's an executive. And I always take it as a real badge of pride when I write a speech for someone and they say, "Oh, you really captured my voice." It wasn't just a good speech. It was a good speech for them. That's really meaningful. But I think beyond that, what playwriting really taught me was structure. And how do you structure a story? There's a great quote, you may have heard this, which is, "A story is the way to tell it," right? A story is the way to tell it. There's no such thing as the story. There's the telling of the story. You can tell the story a million different ways. And how you tell the story, that's the story. And so as a playwright, you have to figure out, how much attention do we put on this? What goes first? What do you put in? What do you take out? What's funny? What's not funny? What's the emotional arc? All of that. And the same is true in corporate events. You have to figure out that structure. You have to figure out what goes in, what you cut, and really what the heart of it is. And one of the things I love, at first I was intimidated by it because I would meet with executives. And to be honest, I was surprised that they didn't know what they wanted to talk about. Sometimes, some of them. And they would ask me.
That's very common. That's very common. They're like, I don't know. We want to motivate them. We want to energize them. But specifically, they don't always know.
Right. Partly because that isn't really their job necessarily, and so to know that you're the person who's coming in, and I love asking dumb questions. I think dumb questions get to the heart of the matter immediately. And so I'll just start asking, well, what's interesting about what happened this year? What do you want the audience to know that they don't already know? What do you want them to feel? And perhaps most importantly, what do you want them to do when they go home that's different from what they were doing beforehand? And a lot of times they haven't thought about questions like that. Oh, okay. Well, in that case, let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. And so being a surrogate for the audience, which is something that I did as a director all the time, really, really helps the executives to figure out what is the story? What is the most impactful information that they have to give in this presentation?
So, you talked about you being able to speak in their voice. How does that come about? And would you say that's a forte of yours, being a playwright, to be able to hear their voice and then have them talk intelligently about something, or really getting at the heart of what they want to say? That must be, very satisfying for you.
It is. And I do think it's something that I'm very good at, but I suspect a lot of writers are very good at it. You sort of have to be, right? If the speech only works in your voice, it ain't going to work. So if you're going to be any good at this job, you have to be able to figure it out. So, ideally, I get to talk to them either live or on a Zoom or over the phone. And you get it, you pick it up, you start to hear it. If that's not possible, nowadays, a lot of times there's videos of people, whether they're public on YouTube or whether, the clients you're working with just, oh, yeah, we have a video of him talking 3 weeks ago at an event. Oh, great. Can I see that? And you start to get a sense of what they might be comfortable with, what they think is funny, what's important to them, how they structure a story. And so you want to find what your parameters are. And then you work within that and you try to give them the best version of that you've got.
So you've had let's say a successful event with a client. They're having you come back the next year. Specifically in that situation, or just in general, how do you creatively stay inspired and motivated in your role as a creative director?
A lot of it really is kind of what we've been talking about, is thinking about it from the audience's point of view and thinking about what is the story that they want to tell. To me, that's where the creativity comes from. It's not about, let's come up with a gimmick. Let's do something crazy for the sake of doing something crazy. Why are we doing it? What are we trying to do? Those are the kind of dumb questions that I'm always asking. What's the point? Why are we here? What do we want out of this? And that, to me, that fuels me. Oh, well, if we want that, well, maybe we do this, maybe we do this, maybe we do this, and that's kind of where it comes from.
Yeah, everyone now is talking about storytelling. That was a great quote you said earlier. So how do you use storytelling to create a cohesive and engaging narrative throughout an event?
I think the same principles that apply in theater apply to corporate storytelling. So basically, I would boil that down to objectives, stakes, and obstacles. What do we want? Why do we need it? And what's in our way of getting it? Every good story has that. You could tell a story about, whatever. I went to the store and I wanted to buy something and I didn't have my wallet and I talked someone into, selling it to me and I went home. Not a very good story. But if you went to the store and you had to get this item because your child was sick at home. And if you didn't get this, NyQuil, her fever was going to spike, but you didn't have your wallet. So what'd you do? You had to talk the person into giving it to you. So you smiled, but that didn't work. So then you threatened her. I'm going to call your boss, but that didn't, you get the idea. You can, those stakes, those objectives, that's what makes a story interesting. And a corporate story is almost always the same way. We're introducing a new feature to our product. Why? What are we trying to do? Why is it important? What are our competitors doing where they're beating us? Do we think that this feature is really going to work? Why? Why not? Have we tested it? Do people like it? Do they not like it? What do we have to do to make it work, to make it please our customers? If you can get into that stuff, then you've got your audience not just on your side, but wanting to jump in and help. And that's usually the kind of thing we're going for.
And do you ever put together, I think before you got into the industry, this was an industry where they were doing like book shows. They would actually take theatrical productions. There was lots of music and dance. And it was a very entertaining kind of experience for the audience. And that sort of faded away. But are there times where you have to take this one section and create a theatrical event? That must be fun to do, as opposed to, we're trying to keep these presentations to create a story. Have you had a recent event where there was a big spectacle, that something that you produced or created?
Yeah. Well, have you seen Bathtubs Over Broadway?
No, but I literally just came across that either in my Facebook feed or something like that. Is it a play off of Bullets Over Broadway or?
No, okay. The title is, but You would love it. I highly, highly recommend it to you and any of your listeners who haven't seen it. It's a documentary about exactly what you're talking about, the golden age of industrial musicals. There was a writer named Steve Young. He wrote for the David Letterman show.
He was on your show recently, right?
He was. Okay. I have a podcast and he was a guest on our podcast, but he had a segment on the Letterman show of Dave's records where they would pull out these old crazy records and play these weird songs. And it was very, very funny. And through that work, he found these records of these old corporate shows and he became obsessed. And so Bathtubs Over Broadway is sort of simultaneously about the musicals and Steve's quest to understand them and honor them. And it's hilarious and amazing and quite unexpectedly touching. It will be a treat, I promise you.
Now, is the title come from maybe they were doing something for Kohler or some bathtub brand? And
that's exactly right.
Is that what it was? Okay.
Yeah. There's a song in there, I think it's called In My Bathroom. And it's this beautiful ballad to what we do in our bathrooms. And it's hilarious and moving and a beautiful song. And it's just great. After talking to Steve, I've become obsessed with wanting to bring it back. And obviously, it's not right for everybody. It's not right for many people. But when it's right, I think it could be incredibly effective. So I'm gonna be pushing for that, where I can find the opportunity to actually do, a little mini musical about a particular brand. Listen, it worked for all those years. They weren't crazy. They were onto something. And you learn this in the documentary. The budgets they had were astronomical. And so you have to sort of figure out how to do it on a lower budget. But that's where I come from, off-Broadway and off-Broadway theater. We were doing musicals for no money, and they were fantastic. And so it absolutely can be done.
Yeah, I love going to New York to see great theater. Big fan of the podcast Smart List. So I got to see Sean Hayes in Goodnight Oscar. Have you seen that yet?
I haven't, but I would love to. Yeah, and I love that podcast too.
Yeah, it is brilliant. Speaking of podcasts, that's how we know each other. So on one of my episodes, one of my intros, I talked about, hey, it's no big deal that I have a podcast. I bet everyone who's listening has a podcast. And I said, if you do, reach out to me and I'll listen to yours. And you did reach out and I did listen. And I really enjoyed your podcast. And that's why we're connected, right now. Tell me about your podcast, because both of us being in the industry, there's, probably dozens of event industry podcasts out there, but I am learning so much just hosting this podcast. Tell us what your podcast name is and where we can find it. Obviously, Apple everywhere, but tell us what it's about and what your experience has been as a host.
Sure. So it's called the Procast, and it's sponsored by Proscenium, which is the company I work for that produces these fantastic corporate events. It really was born out of that curiosity that I was talking about. When you go on site with people, you get to know them and you get to work with them and you get to hang out with them a little, but rarely do you really get to sit down and talk with them. And I just had a lot of questions. So it's something that came up, and to the great credit of Chuck Santoro and Mark Sheeran, they went for it and said, yeah, let's give it a try. And like you said, I've learned so much talking to people that I think it becomes a very valuable asset. And the other thing that I have found, and I'm curious if you found this as well, sometimes very different kinds of people say similar things. And you realize, okay, this is a thing. Like, this is pervasive.
Happening. Right.
It's happening. If you ask someone what a particular pet peeve is or a problem, or, one thing that I've heard over and over again, I've asked, what tips do you have for presenters? What have you seen on stage that just kind of drives you crazy? And people say they want presenters to tell more stories and be more personable.
Authentic. Be more authentic across the board. That's all I'm hearing.
100%. Mm-hmm. And, the presenters just need to hear that, because they often go the opposite way, right? Presenters are terrified that something is going to go wrong. And I always say to them, you should be so lucky. If something goes wrong, the audience is going to love you. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be all buttoned up and, spot on professional. I'm sure you've seen this a million times. The worst thing is when someone comes out on stage and says, "Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here." And you just think, okay, well, I've just learned one thing. This guy can read, and I can't trust him to tell me the truth. And, just get up there and be honest. It's no more difficult than that, even though that's incredibly difficult to do. But if you can crack it, it's gold. It's exactly what makes the best presentation.
So let's talk about some of the events that Proscenium has produced. Is there any event, can you share any memorable event or project that you worked on that made you feel, that made it special to you, that you created this thing, it came out exactly how you envisioned it, the clients, or wow, it shot past their expectations?
Well, there was one event. We did a national distributors conference for Heineken a few years ago. And the set that we created was very innovative at the time. We had an LED floor, which events had not been doing yet at that time. And the audience was in 3 sides around the floor. And then we had LED screens behind them, all the way around them. So they were really enveloped. And Heineken, has a lot of different brands. And so different brand managers would come up and talk about, whatever it was for their brand. And so we were able to put them in their environments. So Strongbow would come up and talk about apple cider, and boom, they're in an apple orchard, and it was beautiful. Or Dos Equis would come up and talk about a sports sponsorship they have, and boom, they're on a football field. It was gorgeous. And we won an X Award for it. And it was really, really technologically beautiful. But for me, what was maybe most gratifying was the experience that the presenters had. And this comes back to what we were talking about before. The presenters were so nervous about audience on 3 sides. A lot of them had never done that before. And they were scared. Like you said, this is, professional performers get scared in those circumstances. They were nervous. And I helped them and I worked with them, and we came up with all sorts of different ways to stage different people. So we had a lot of different looks, a lot of different fun. Even just the staging really came from their personalities and their content. And when it was over, they loved it because they felt so much more connected to the audience. The audience was much closer because they're on 3 sides, so you don't have to be as deep. And they were able to really talk to people instead of talking out, to this vast cavern. And for me, that was just so gratifying that we had come up with this concept that really supported them. And even though they were nervous, they trusted us. We helped them. We got them through it. And then ultimately they thought it was just great.
I love that you were talking about bringing the audience in, a little bit tighter as opposed to just being in a proscenium stage, which proscenium, the name of your company, probably comes from that.
It does.
Tell me any other experiences where you were trying to incorporate the audience into the experience, either through staging or through some other, format.
Yeah. I mean, I'm always trying to integrate the audience. I feel like whenever you have something that is a one-way conversation, you're short thrifting them. And if you can bring them in and talk with them and not at them, it makes a huge, huge difference. So I'm always looking for ways, whether it's creating videos with them, panels with them, or bringing them up on stage. We do something, that isn't, I'm sure you've seen it, a lot, but rather than having a voice of God, introduce a presenter, why not have one of your folks come up on stage and introduce the presenter? But what I always try to do when they're doing that is give them just a paragraph. It's not just, my name, my title, and now, here he is, Scott Bloom. Talk a little bit about whatever the theme of the meeting is. If we're talking about innovation, what did you do last year that was particularly innovative? What is a best practice that you can share that will resonate for the audience? Because I think so much of why the audience is there is to network and learn from each other as much as from the executives. And so when you have those little opportunities, to me, it just seems like a shame not to take them. It's not particularly innovative or crazy, but it's unbelievably effective.
Oh, yeah. I love that. I love that idea of having these people from the audience come up, but also have their sort of personal experience relating to whatever that theme is. So what advice would you give to an aspiring creative director or even a producer looking to make their mark in the events industry?
I think I would give the same advice that Chuck Santoro, who was my mentor, gave to me, which is he said, don't marry the creative. And so just to unpack that a bit, what I think he meant was you're going to come up with a great idea. They're going to love it. We're going to move forward with it. And then it's going to get cut. Or it's going to get changed, or it's going to become unrecognizable by the time it's done. That's okay. And, that gets back to my point from before about fighting for the most creative idea, but then also being able to let it go and know that maybe that's not what this event needs. Maybe this particular presenter really can't pull that idea off and it won't end up making them look good or whatever the reasons are. So I think the advice I would give is, go for it. Have crazy ideas. Push the boundaries of what you think this brand can do, but also be willing to let it go or let it change. And don't take it personally. Don't worry about it. Just move on. I think one of the most gratifying and exciting parts of this business is learning all of these different brands. Heineken is very different from Harley Davidson, who we work with, or Schwab, who we work with, or the UPS store, who we work with. They all have unique brand personalities. And so my job in part is to learn what that personality is and then bring it to life on stage. And there is a curve to that. You have to really understand what's appropriate. But in a live setting, you can sometimes push the brand a little more than the brand might feel comfortable pushing itself, let's say in an ad, and that's really fun when you can find where that line is and come right up next to it. I love that.
So you're talking about things that you love. What else do you love? What do you find is the most satisfying, the most rewarding aspect of your job? You said some of it was about learning about new brands. There's the creative side of being able to push things. I like that idea of being able to push it better live than they might do in a TV spot or something, or some sort of branding or advertising. What gets you really, really excited?
I think I look at it in a couple of different buckets. I think the first bucket is the audience. And, again, that sense of when they all laugh at the same time, or they all gasp at the same time, or they cry, it's just beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. The second thing is the clients you're working with, the presenters. When you have someone who's nervous, or maybe they haven't presented before, or they don't think they're going to do a good job, or even, dare I say, some of their colleagues are saying, oh, he's not great on stage, and you work with them and then they're fantastic. And even their colleagues are saying, wow, he's never given a presentation like that. That was amazing. That's a very, very gratifying feeling. And then the last thing is the people that I'm working with. As I said, I love collaborating. And whether that's someone new, a host who comes in who I haven't worked with before, or whether it's a lighting director who I've worked with many times before, or my colleagues, the producers, the content managers, it's bouncing ideas off of them, coming up with that third idea. What if we do this? What if we do that? What if we do the other thing? Yes, that's it. I love that feeling.
100%. I mean, I listen to you and I get excited. That's what I love about this podcast. I get the chance to speak to people who are passionate about this business. And it's, it is business theater, as, to bring it back to the very beginning, but it is also theater, and it is creative, and it is collaboration. It is getting excited about things, and it's a process, and you can really enjoy it. We're not making widgets. We're actually creating something. And you must love the fact that you've been maybe building up to where you are, your whole life. I'm sure you're still writing plays and doing all that whole artistic and creative side of you found a vessel, an area that you can explore, areas that you probably never even thought you would explore, and still get the same sort of artistic satisfaction, the business satisfaction, the financial satisfaction, and the creative satisfaction. So I'm glad we got a chance to finally chat like this.
Can I just give you another example of
Sure.
what you're talking about? On some of our larger shows, we have done, essentially a talent show, right? Where you go out to, let's say, T-Mobile, right? You go out to all of these store managers and you ask them to submit a video showing their talent. And we pick, the people who we think are really fantastic, and they're on stage at the event. Well, we have had events where we pick someone out, they come in and they tell us, I've never traveled before. I've never been outside my home state. I've never been on an airplane before, let alone here I am in Las Vegas, or wherever it is. And they get on stage in front of 5,000 people and they do the thing that they are good at. They sing or they dance or they rap or whatever it is. And sometimes they get a standing ovation, or, there's the CEO in the front row, applauding for them. And they sound like rock stars. They've got graphics behind them that are, better than, Journey has behind them, or, whatever it is. And the level of satisfaction you get from giving, you said we're not making widgets. That's what made me think of it. We're giving people a once in a lifetime experience that they will never forget. And that is just incredible. Who gets to do that? What a gift, And
it's something always to keep in mind that, for them, they don't get to do this all the time. They don't get to travel all the time. And I absolutely love the sort of T-Mobile's Got Talent, or whatever way you branded that event. I've hosted several of those, and every single time, I think this should be almost a staple at a lot of these events, because not only are you showcasing these hidden talents people have, I mean, people are blown away. As you said, they're getting standing ovations. There are people you didn't know they could sing like that. And everyone is there supporting. What a great way to bring people together. What a great way to let their people shine. I think it's phenomenal. And I'd love to see more of that. There was a little phase where we were doing a little bit more of that sort of slowed down. But what a great way to talk about employee engagement, getting the audience involved, keeping it interactive, and having just a big wow moment.
I agree 100%. And again, as budgets are getting, tighter, it's incredibly entertaining, and, you don't have to pay, some big band to come in and do it.
Utilize your own people. That's
right.
A great suggestion, a great idea. Hey, Jeremy, thanks so much. We finally did it. I hear rumors I might be doing your podcast sometime soon.
Yeah, absolutely. You are up next, my friend. I cannot wait to have you on.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being on this one, and I look forward to doing yours as well. And have a great day in New York City.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. It's great talking with you. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jeremy. That's it for now. I've been your host, Scott Bloom, corporate event MC and comedic keynote speaker. And of course, your connoisseur of connections. Oh, by the way, if you're interested, you can book me for your next event on eSpeakers Marketplace at espeakers.com/marketplace. And if you like what you heard, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. If you loved what you heard, drop us a review and don't forget to share with your friends. No More Bad Events is produced and presented by eSpeakers. Thanks so much for listening. Now go out and make your event a great one.